Hello family. Welcome to Excited Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us also. Share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Met my ex years later. And it was awkward. I wasn't looking for anything that day. No signs, no closure, no unexpected turns. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind that made the world feel slower and softer. I ducked into my favorite neighborhood, bookstore cafe, the one with the creaky wooden floors and that ever-present smell of old paper and cinnamon lattes. It was supposed to be a quiet day. I was supposed to browse a few shelves, sip something warm, and escape into a novel. But instead, I walked straight into a chapter of my past I thought I had closed for good. He was standing by the philosophy section, of course he was, leafing through a paperback like it hadn't been 7 years since we last saw each other. His hair was a little thinner, streaked with more gray than I remembered. But the way he stood, relaxed with one hand in his pocket, hadn't changed. Neither had the slight crease between his brows when he read. It hit me in the chest, sudden and sharp. A memory masquerading as a moment. I stopped mid-step. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup I'd just bought. For a split second, I debated turning around and walking right back out into the rain. But before I could even consider a graceful escape, he looked up, and our eyes locked. It was like time decided to play a cruel trick, rewinding and fast-forwarding at once. I was 30 again and heartbroken. I was 37 now and supposedly over it. But in that instant, all I could feel was heat rushing to my face and my stomach tying itself in knots. His mouth lifted into a surprised smile, familiar, friendly, and terrifying all at once. "Wow," he said, like he was genuinely stunned. "It's been, what? Years?" I nodded, somehow managing to smile back. 7, I said. Why did I remember the exact number so easily? Why did my voice feel like it was coming from someone else? He stepped forward, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he was going to hug me. He didn't. Thank God. Instead, we just stood there, awkwardly close, like two people unsure of whether they were supposed to pretend to be strangers or admit to the history humming between them. "You look good," he offered. "Thanks," I replied. "So do you." We both paused. The silence was deafening. I noticed the book in his hand, Nietzsche. How fitting, I thought. Then I almost laughed at myself. Even now, I was analyzing him like I used to, looking for clues in casual details. I hated how easily the old patterns came back. He glanced at my coffee cup. "Still drink almond lattes?" I blinked. "Yeah. You remembered?" He gave a small shrug. "Some things stick." That one sentence sent a small ripple down my spine. I wanted to ask him what else stuck. Did he remember the Sunday mornings we used to spend in bed? The fights over nothing that turned into everything? The way I cried the night we ended things? But I didn't say any of that. I couldn't. I was just about to sit down, I said, gesturing to an empty corner table. "Want to join?" To this day, I'm not sure why I invited him. Maybe I wanted to see if he was still the same. Maybe I needed proof that I was different. Or maybe, just maybe, I was tired of pretending that running into your ex years later doesn't shake you to your core. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Why not?" As we walked over and sat down, I couldn't help but think this was either a really good idea or a really, really bad one. But it was happening. The encounter I never planned, never wanted, and somehow, maybe, needed more than I realized. We sat across from each other at a small round table tucked in the back corner of the cafe. The windows were fogged from the rain outside, blurring the world beyond like a smudged memory. The lighting was warm and low, casting gentle shadows across his face, familiar yet changed. It took a moment for either of us to say something. I busied myself with my latte, watching the swirl of foam like it held answers. He rested his arms on the table, his fingers tapping softly, a nervous habit I didn't remember. Maybe it was new. Maybe I'd just forgotten. "So, how have you been?" he asked, his voice even, casual, Too casual. I've been good, I replied. Work's steady. I moved to a new place a couple years ago. Started painting again. His eyes widened slightly. Painting? Wow. You used to talk about that all the time. That's great. I nodded, surprised that he remembered. Yeah. Took me a while to pick it back up, but it helps. Clears my head. He smiled, and for a moment, the tension thinned just enough for us to breathe. I'm glad, he said. Really. I always thought you were incredibly talented. It caught me off guard, hearing him say something kind, unprompted. Our last conversations, 7 years ago, had been cold, clipped, final. It was strange now, talking like two old friends instead of two people who'd once broken each other. What about you? I asked. What's your life look like these days? He leaned back slightly. I work in real estate now. Got into it a few years back. Wasn't the plan, but it suits me. I actually enjoy it. Huh, I said, a little surprised. You used to hate the idea of selling anything. I know, he chuckled. Turns out, I like helping people find the right place. I guess it's different when it feels like something matters. That word, matters, hung between us. There was an awkward pause, and we both sipped our drinks to fill it. I looked around, noticing how little had changed in the cafe since the last time I'd been there. Same mismatched chairs. Same tiny chalkboard sign that said, "Be kind or leave." Funny how some things stay frozen in time, while others move on. You still in touch with anyone from back then? He asked cautiously. I shook my head. Not really. After we broke up, I kind of disappeared. Needed to start over. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Yeah, I did the same. There was a beat of silence before he added, I actually got engaged last year. Her name's Elise. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden turn. Oh, wow, congratulations, he smiled softly. Thanks, she's great, really grounded, patient. That word, patient, did something strange to me. Was that a quality I lacked in his eyes? Or was it something he'd come to value only after our story had ended? I nodded politely, trying not to let it show on my face. I'm happy for you, I said, and I mostly meant it. I'm seeing someone too. His name's Marcus. We've been together for a couple of years now. That's great, he said, and for a second his smile flickered. He treat you well? He does, I said, and I smiled, not out of politeness, but because it was true. It was weird. We were sitting in a place that could have easily been a scene from our old life, and yet it felt completely foreign. The people we were now couldn't have made the same mistakes we did back then. Or maybe we could have, but we'd recognize them sooner. There was something oddly comforting about that. We chatted a bit longer, about small things, books, travel, work. And through it all, I kept noticing the little ways he'd changed. His voice was calmer, his gaze more steady. He listened more than he used to, but the core of him, the ambition, the quiet intensity, was still there. At one point, I found myself laughing at something he said, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. But then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the loneliness that followed the breakup, the therapy, the rebuilding. That laugh faded quickly. Reconnecting wasn't easy. It wasn't magical. It wasn't painful either. It was strange, human, and raw. It felt like picking up a book you once loved only to find you've outgrown its pages. Still beautiful, but no longer yours. And maybe that was okay. After about 45 minutes, we left the cafe. We stood outside under the overhang, watching the rain blur the world into streaks of gray and gold under the streetlights. Neither of us said much at first. I think we both sensed that whatever light, polite conversation we just shared was a kind of emotional prologue. The real storm, the one inside, was still coming. He offered to walk me to my car. I almost said no, but instead, I nodded. Maybe I wasn't ready for the moment to end just yet. Or maybe I didn't want to walk alone with all the feelings now, bubbling to the surface. The silence between us was no longer awkward, but heavy. I felt everything all at once. Nostalgia, regret, curiosity, and something else I couldn't name. My heart wasn't racing the way it used to when I saw him years ago. It wasn't longing. It was more like standing in front of an old house you used to live in. Familiar but no longer home. You know, he said after a moment. There were a lot of times I wanted to reach out. I stopped walking, but I didn't, he continued. I figured it wouldn't be fair. Or maybe I was just afraid. The words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him, really looked at him. Why? What were you afraid of? He gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. Of what you'd say. Of what I might feel again. I guess I didn't trust myself, and I figured you didn't need me dredging up old wounds. My throat tightened. There was something about hearing him admit that, after so long, after the way things ended, that made the past feel both more real and more distant. I used to wait for a message, I admitted quietly. Even after I told myself I was over it. Even after I blocked your number. I still hoped. He looked down, his hands shoved in his coat pockets. I'm sorry. I really am. For how I left things. For the things I said. For the things I didn't. I didn't expect an apology. Not now. Not 7 years later, on a rainy street, when I thought I had nothing left to feel. But there it was. And suddenly, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something that had waited too long to be named. The breakup hadn't been clean. There were no dramatic fights or betrayals. Just distance, resentment, and silence. We had grown apart, or maybe we'd never really grown up. I remember feeling so lost when it ended, like a rug had been pulled out from under me. I spent months trying to find my footing again. I blamed you for a long time, I said, staring out at the wet pavement. But the truth is, I wasn't happy either. I just didn't want to admit it. He nodded slowly. We were trying to hold on to something that wasn't working. I think we both knew it, but it still hurt like hell. We stood there, rain drizzling on the sidewalk, cars hissing past. I didn't know what to say next. There was so much I wanted to ask. Did you miss me? Did you ever wonder what could have been? But I also knew that answers didn't change the past. Instead, I asked, do you think we were ever right for each other? He didn't respond immediately. Then he said, maybe at the beginning. But I think we both needed to go through that relationship to become who we are now. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. But it was honest. And in that honesty, I felt something shift in me, a release. For years I had carried this invisible weight, a blend of sadness, guilt, and questions with no answers. But standing there with him now, I realized I didn't need closure in the way I thought I did. I just needed to know we had. Both made it to the other side. Eventually, we reached my car. I turned to face him. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, he replied. And thanks for today. For not walking away. I smiled. I thought about it. He laughed, and for the first time that evening, it sounded real and free. We shared a final glance, one filled with every unsaid word, and then I got into my car. As I drove away, my chest ached, but not in a painful way. It was the ache of something heavy finally being set down. The drive home was unusually quiet. No music, no podcasts, just the rhythmic squeak of my windshield wipers and the sound of my own thoughts. As the city blurred by through the rain-streaked windows, my mind traveled not forward but backward. Back to a time when my heart still beat for him. Back to the nights spent tangled in both affection and confusion. Back to the version of myself I hadn't thought about in years. It was strange how easily memories returned once invited. I remembered our tiny one-bedroom apartment with the leaky faucet, the takeout nights on the floor when we couldn't afford a table yet. I remembered his laugh echoing through the hallway and how I'd feel a rush of comfort hearing his key turn in the door. But I also remembered the silences. The arguments that started small and bloomed into something unrecognizable. I remembered crying alone in the shower so he wouldn't hear. I remembered how it felt to give more than I had, hoping it would be enough to make him stay. Our breakup had been slow. It wasn't a collapse, it was erosion. a gentle, persistent wearing down of who we were. We stopped touching, stopped asking questions. We became polite strangers who shared a bed. And eventually, we stopped pretending that love alone was enough. At the time, it felt like failure. I had internalized it all, every unsaid word, every misunderstanding, as a reflection of something broken in me. I wasn't enough. I was too emotional, too needy, not supportive enough. I walked away believing that I was the problem. It took a long time to unlearn that. Therapy helped, friends helped, time helped, but healing was slow and uneven. I rebuilt myself one jagged piece at a time, and with each piece, I began to understand. It wasn't about blame. It wasn't about who hurt who more. It was about the fact that we weren't right. We loved each other, but we couldn't grow together. Seeing him again reopened that emotional file, but this time I wasn't overwhelmed by grief. I saw it for what it was, a chapter of my life that had shaped me, but didn't define me. As I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, engine humming, I thought about how different I felt now compared to the woman I was back then. Back then, I didn't know how to be alone. I was afraid of silence. I mistook intensity for love and sacrifice for worth. Now, I was more grounded. I knew my value didn't come from being someone's partner. It came from being myself. And maybe that's what made today so strange. It wasn't the awkwardness of seeing an ex. It was the surreal realization that I had truly moved on. Not just romantically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not apologies, not explanations, not even validation. That was the true closure. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by my window watching the rain taper off. I thought about something he said. We both needed to go through that relationship to become who we are now. I hadn't expected wisdom from him, but he was right. Our relationship had been both a crucible and a mirror. It showed me my wounds and helped me find the strength to heal them. I also realized that my resentment had faded. I had spent so long angry at him for not trying harder, for leaving without answers. But the truth was, we both did the best we could with what we knew then. We weren't villains. We were just two people who hadn't yet figured out how to love each other without hurting ourselves. And maybe that's the most honest kind of reflection. One that doesn't point fingers, but simply accepts. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd rekindled over the past few years. I wrote about how it felt to see him. How the past didn't feel like a wound anymore. How I didn't cry. How I didn't wish things had turned out differently. That realization surprised me more than anything. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real. And in a quiet, grounded way, it was freeing. The next morning felt oddly still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from silence, but the kind that follows a storm. A sort of internal quiet that suggests something important has passed. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of cooling coffee, staring out the window at the damp streets and leaf-littered sidewalks. I kept replaying the previous day in my mind, seeing him, talking to him, standing next to him again after all those years. It had stirred up so much more than I expected. But strangely, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't feel raw or undone. I felt settled, like some long unanswered question had finally received its reply. I realized something important in those hours after seeing him. We were never meant to get back together. There was no romantic movie moment, no magical reconnection or reignited spark. That wasn't the point. The encounter hadn't reopened old wounds. It had shown me that those wounds had already healed, even if I hadn't noticed it happen. What I learned from that awkward emotional reunion was far more valuable than a second chance at love. I learned how far I'd come. I learned that forgiveness, real, deep, soul-level forgiveness, wasn't something you gave just to the other person. It was something you gave yourself too. For a long time I carried a quiet guilt. Not about what I did or didn't do in the relationship, but about how long I let that chapter define me. I clung to the story of what went wrong as if it were a map, hoping it would guide me toward understanding. But the truth is, Maps only help if you're still trying to find your way back. I wasn't. I was already somewhere new. The encounter also made me reflect on how I approach relationships. Now, with Marcus, things are simpler, but not boring. We talk, really talk, without fear of judgment. I'm not afraid to express what I need, and I no longer feel like I have to earn love by shrinking myself to fit someone else's world. I choose to be seen, and to see him clearly too. That clarity is something I never had in my past relationship. Back then, love felt like a test I was always trying to pass. Now, it feels like a space where I can rest. After I finished my coffee, I opened my phone and stared at the contact I hadn't touched in years. I hadn't deleted his number. Maybe part of me never did because, deep down, I knew we'd cross paths again someday. I didn't save it under a name, just an old string of digits that still, somehow, felt familiar. For a moment, I considered texting him, something simple like, "It was good to see you." But I didn't. Not because I was bitter, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to anymore. There's something powerful in choosing silence, not as avoidance, but as peace. That evening, I went for a walk around my neighborhood. The sky was clearing, and the pavement shimmered with the last remnants of the afternoon's drizzle. As I walked past the blooming dogwoods and the uneven sidewalk tiles, I thought about how life has a strange way of circling back. Not always to repeat the past, but to show you how much you've grown beyond it. I used to believe closure came from a dramatic conversation or some final declaration. But now I understand that closure is quiet. It's the way your heart doesn't race anymore when you hear their name. It's the steady breath you take when you walk away without looking back. And it's the understanding that not every story is meant to have a second chapter. Sometimes, just knowing how it ends is enough. By the time I returned home, the sun had dipped low, casting soft orange light across my front steps. I paused there for a moment, looking up at the sky, feeling lighter. We met. We talked. It was awkward. It was emotional, and it was exactly what it needed to be. But the most important part? I kept walking forward, not to escape the past, but because I no longer needed it to guide me. It's strange how life tends to echo itself. Just when I thought my story with him had fully played out, neatly folded and stored in memory, it surprised me again. 2 weeks after our reunion, I ran into him a second time. This time, it wasn't at a cozy cafe or under the romantic haze of nostalgia. It was in the most ordinary of places, the grocery store. I had just finished a long day at work and stopped by to grab a few things. Hair in a messy bun, tote bag slung over my shoulder, I was halfway down the produce aisle when I heard someone say my name. Hey. Wow. Twice in 1 month? There he was, holding a basket of apples and looking just as surprised as I felt. It took me a second to respond, partly because I wasn't expecting to see him again, and partly because something inside me braced for a flood of emotion that, thankfully, never came. "Hey," I said, forcing a small smile. "What are the odds?" He chuckled, lifting a gala apple. "I guess we've got similar taste in snacks." I rolled my eyes playfully, and for a moment it felt oddly comfortable, not intimate, just familiar in that way you only feel with someone who once knew your daily habits and the way you liked your coffee. We made small talk. He asked how work was going, and I asked about his sister, whom I'd been close with years ago. She'd just had her second baby, he said, showing me a blurry photo on his phone. I congratulated him, and meant it. Then there was a pause. One of those quiet gaps in conversation that's neither tense nor empty, just loaded. I reached for a bag of spinach, and he asked, "Have you thought about our conversation the other day?" I looked at him, surprised by his sudden pivot. "Yeah," I admitted. "A lot, actually." "Me too," he said. It's strange. I walked away feeling lighter but also wondering if maybe we should talk more. That caught me off guard. The way he said it wasn't suggestive or romantic. It was thoughtful, careful, like he was approaching a fragile artifact from our shared past with gentle hands. I hesitated, searching for the right words. I appreciated our talk, I really did. But I think I think that was enough for me. He nodded slowly, a flash of disappointment crossing his face before he masked it with a polite smile. I understand. I guess I wanted to make sure it wasn't unfinished. I exhaled, then said, maybe it always was a little unfinished, but not everything needs to be completed to have value. He seemed to take that in, and to his credit, he didn't push. You've changed a lot, he said after a moment. In a good way. So have you, I replied. We said our goodbyes, near the checkout line. No lingering looks, no promises to stay in touch. Just a nod, a small wave, and the mutual recognition that we were no longer the people we once were. Walking back to my car, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel shaken. I felt proud of myself, of the way I'd handled it, of the boundaries I now honored without guilt. That second meeting wasn't the start of something new. It was the confirmation of something already finished, and as I loaded groceries into my trunk, I realized something I hadn't been able to say aloud before. I didn't regret our relationship. Not even the messy parts, because all of it led me here, to a version of myself who was stronger, wiser, and more certain of what I deserved. Seeing him again, unexpectedly, reminded me that closure isn't a one-time event. Sometimes it comes in waves. Sometimes it shows up in the grocery aisle. And sometimes it simply means choosing yourself all over again. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day. A small sign, maybe, or just a bit of light finally finding its way in. A few days after the grocery store run-in, I found myself reflecting not just on the past, but on the stark contrast between then and now. Life had moved forward in so many quiet, powerful ways that I hadn't always noticed. But when the past shows up and stands face to face with your present, the differences become undeniable. That weekend, Marcus and I had plans to go to a small dinner party hosted by his friends. People I'd met a handful of times but was still getting to know. As we got ready, I found myself watching him with fresh eyes. The way he helped me zip up my dress without being asked. How he laughed with his whole body. How he checked to make sure I'd eaten before we left. These tiny gestures felt like gentle reassurances, proof of the life I'd built, the choices I'd made at the party. Someone asked how we met. Marcus told the story, his version filled with humor and charm, and I listened, smiling, while sipping my wine. And when the conversation turned to past relationships, something shifted inside me. I felt no urge to hide, to lie, or to brush over the details. Instead, I simply said, yeah, I've had relationships that didn't work out, but they helped shape who I am now. I don't carry bitterness from them anymore. I could feel Marcus looking at me then, not with suspicion or jealousy, but curiosity and warmth. Later that night, when we were in the car driving home, he reached over and took my hand. You know, he said, I really admire the way you talk about your past. There's no drama, just honesty. I squeezed his hand, smiling. It took a while to get here, and it had. Years, in fact. Years of replaying conversations that ended in slammed doors, of wondering if I should have tried harder or walked away sooner. But time, distance, and intentional healing had done something miraculous. They'd rewired the way I viewed that version of myself. Not with shame, but with compassion. I told Marcus about running into my ex, both times, and he didn't flinch. He didn't pepper me with questions or demand explanations. He just asked, how did it feel? Strangely peaceful, I said, like the end of a chapter I didn't know was still open. He nodded, and I could tell he understood. That's the thing about real, healthy love. It doesn't feel threatened by your past. It holds space for it, knowing it helped you become the person standing there now. That night, after brushing my teeth and changing into pajamas, I stood at the mirror for a moment. I looked at my reflection. Not just at my features, but at my eyes. There was clarity there, and confidence. A kind of stillness that comes when you've made peace with your story. I thought about how easily I might have slipped into old habits if I weren't the person I am now. How easy it would have been to mistake familiarity for fate, or unresolved tension for romantic chemistry. but I didn't. I chose not to. Because the truth is, the person I used to be needed that relationship to grow. She needed the heartbreak, the confusion, the nights of questioning her worth. Because without that pain, she wouldn't have learned how to advocate for herself, how to draw boundaries, how to love in a way that didn't require sacrificing her soul. And now, when the past tried to nudge its way back in, I didn't open the door. I simply nodded through the window and walked away. The past didn't scare me anymore. It wasn't something I had to outrun or bury. It had become a soft, familiar story, a memory I could revisit without falling back in. The encounter with my ex had been awkward, unsettling even. But it also reminded me that growth doesn't always come with loud victories or dramatic revelations. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you choose peace over patterns, in the way you look at your present and know, deeply, that you wouldn't trade it for anything that once was. A month passed, then two. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Quiet mornings, long work days, weekend brunches, spontaneous drives, with Marcus, and slowly that strange encounter with my ex faded into the background, not forgotten, but no longer taking up space in the front of my mind. One Saturday, I was tidying up the apartment, doing laundry, vacuuming, the usual, when I found an old shoebox in the back of my closet. It was labeled in faint pen, "College stuff." I smiled, not quite remembering what was inside, and sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor to open it. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years: ticket stubs, Polaroids, old notes scribbled during lectures, even a few dried flowers. And among them, folded carefully, was a letter. From him. It wasn't dated, but I remembered exactly when it was written. It was after one of our big fights, during a time we were both pretending everything was fine. I never responded to the letter, and I don't think he ever asked why. Maybe we both knew we didn't have the tools back then to have the conversation we needed. I read it now, years later, as a completely different person. The words, once sharp and confusing, now felt soft. I no longer read them with defensiveness or pain. I simply saw them for what they were. A young man trying to articulate his feelings the only way he knew how. And a young woman, me, trying to understand love while still learning how to love herself. I put the letter back in the box and closed the lid, not out of sadness, but out of respect. That part of my life had mattered, but it no longer defined me. Later that evening, Marcus and I went for a walk at the park. The air was crisp, and the sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden hue across the trees. As we walked in comfortable silence, I found myself thinking about how far I'd come, and how strange it is that growth often arrives without a grand finale. "You know what I realized today?" I said, breaking the quiet. Marcus glanced at me, curious. "What's that?" "I think I finally made peace with everything. The past, my mistakes, even the parts of me I used to hate." He smiled and squeezed my hand. "That's big." "It is," I nodded. And weirdly enough, I think running into my ex helped. Not because I wanted anything from him, but because it showed me I didn't. There was a stillness in Marcus's expression. Not the silent kind, but the kind that's filled with understanding. That's the thing about being with someone who truly sees you. They don't need the full explanation, they just get it. We walked a little farther, and I thought about how people romanticize closure. We think it comes with a final talk or a dramatic moment of clarity, but sometimes it comes in whispers, in unreturned texts, in the way you no longer check their social media, in the calm you feel when you walk away without needing to win. That chance meeting with my ex had been awkward, yes, messy even. But it had also been necessary. It held up a mirror to the person I used to be and gently reminded me how far I'd traveled. And now I could look back without flinching, without regret, without longing. As we reached the end of the path, I turned to Marcus and smiled. "Thanks for walking this with me, not just today, all of it." He looked confused for a second, then grinned. "I didn't realize we were going anywhere." "Oh, we are," I said, laughing. "Just not backward." And with that, we kept walking. toward a future that didn't need to be proven, only lived. One step at a time. One day at a time, full circle.